The blood on her dress was not hers, but the entire town of Fort Stockton, Texas, seemed convinced otherwise, their accusing eyes following Willa Vaughn as she stood trembling in the dusty street under the merciless sun of August 1876. The body of Margaret Harris lay just inside the mercantile, and Willa had been the one to discover her, had been the one foolish enough to touch the woman's throat to check for a pulse. And now her fingers were stained crimson while the shopkeeper's wife pointed and shrieked that she had caught the murderer red-handed. Willa's hands shook as she held them up, trying to explain what had happened, but her voice seemed lost beneath the growing murmur of the crowd gathering around her. She had only been in Fort Stockton for 3 weeks, having traveled from San Antonio after her father's death left her with nothing but debts, and the name of a distant cousin who supposedly lived in this dried-up West Texas town. That cousin had turned out to be long dead, leaving Willa stranded with barely enough money for a week's room and board at the boarding house. "I found her like that," Willa managed to say, her voice cracking. "I swear, I just walked in and she was already on the floor. I was only trying to help." "Help yourself to the cash box more like," the shopkeeper, Thomas Harris, bellowed as he emerged from the back room, his face purple with rage and grief. "My Margaret dead and this stranger standing over her with blood on her hands. Someone get the sheriff." The crowd pressed closer, and Willa felt panic rising in her chest. She had nowhere to run, no one who would vouch for her character in this town where she was nothing but an outsider. The faces surrounding her were hard, suspicious, already convinced of her guilt. She saw Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house shaking her head with disgust, saw the banker Mr. Crawford crossing his arms with grim satisfaction, saw young Billy Henderson looking at her like she was a monster. "Now hold on just a minute." The voice that cut through the chaos was deep and commanding, resonating with an authority that made everyone pause. The crowd parted reluctantly, and Willa caught her first glimpse of the man who would change everything. He was enormous, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they blocked out the sun as he stepped between Willa and the angry mob. His hair was dark brown and fell past his collar, slightly wild and windswept, and his face was all hard angles covered by several days' worth of stubble. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, pale blue and sharp as a hawk's, taking in every detail of the scene with a calculating intelligence. He wore buckskin pants and a simple cotton shirt that strained across a chest and arms corded with muscle, the kind of strength that came from years of hard living in unforgiving country. A large knife hung from his belt, and he carried a rifle with the ease of a man who knew how to use it. "Mason Morgan," Thomas Harris said, his voice losing some of its fury but retaining its hardness. "This does not concern you. This woman killed my wife." "That's so." Mason's voice was calm, almost lazy, but there was steel underneath. "Because from where I am standing, looks to me like you have made up your mind without even looking at the evidence." "The evidence is right there," Harris pointed at Willa's bloody hands. "She was standing over Margaret's body. What more do we need?" Mason turned to look at Willa, and she found herself unable to look away from those piercing blue eyes. They swept over her face, her trembling form, her stained fingers, but there was no judgment in them, only assessment. Then he turned back to Harris. "Was anything stolen?" Mason asked. The question seemed to catch Harris off guard. "What? Was anything stolen?" Mason repeated patiently. "The cash box, any merchandise, anything missing?" Harris's face reddened further. "Well, I have not exactly had time to take inventory." "Then maybe you should do that before you string up an innocent woman." Mason's voice had gone quiet and dangerous. "Maybe you should let the sheriff do his job." Maybe you should ask yourself why a killer would still be standing there when you came in from the back room instead of running out the front door." A murmur ran through the crowd, and Willa saw doubt begin to flicker across some faces. Mason was not done, though. "When did you last see your wife alive?" Mason directed the question at Harris, his eyes never leaving the man's face. "This morning, about an hour ago. I went to check on a delivery at the warehouse. When I came back." Harris's voice broke, and genuine grief crossed his features. "When I came back, she was dead and this woman was here." "An hour," Mason said thoughtfully. He looked at Willa again. "When did you arrive at the store?" Willa found her voice, though it still shook. "Maybe 5 minutes before Mr. Harris returned. I came to buy some thread." "The door was open, but no one answered when I called out. I walked in and saw her lying there, and I thought maybe I could help." "You thought you could help," Mason repeated, not mockingly but as if considering her words carefully. He turned back to the crowd. "Anyone see this woman enter the store?" There was silence, then a hesitant voice spoke up. It was young Sarah Mitchell, the Reverend's daughter. "I saw her walking toward the mercantile. That was maybe 10 minutes ago. She was carrying her sewing basket, like she said." Mason nodded. "Anyone see anyone else enter or leave the store in the past hour?" More silence, then Billy Henderson spoke up, his voice uncertain now. "I saw a man leaving about 15, maybe 20 minutes ago. Did not recognize him. Thought he was just a customer." "What did he look like?" Mason's attention was razor sharp now. "Tall, I guess. Dark hat, dark coat. I did not pay much attention." Billy shuffled his feet, looking uncomfortable. Mason turned to Harris. "You know every customer who comes into your store?" "Most of them, but we get travelers through here." "Could have been anyone." Harris was looking less certain now, the righteous fury fading into confusion and grief. "Could have been," Mason agreed. "Or could have been someone specific. Your wife have any enemies?" "Margaret." Harris looked genuinely shocked. "No, everyone loved Margaret." "Everyone except the person who killed her," Mason pointed out. He looked at Willa again, and this time his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Miss, what is your name?" "Willa Vaughn," she managed to say. "Miss Vaughn, do you have any reason to want Mrs. Harris dead?" "No. I barely knew her. I bought some fabric from her last week and she was kind to me. That is all." Willa's voice was stronger now, bolstered by Mason's calm rationality. "Did you touch anything besides Mrs. Harris?" Willa thought back, trying to remember through the haze of shock. "The door frame when I entered. I called out, and when no one answered, I stepped inside. I saw her and went to her, knelt beside her. I touched her neck, checking for a heartbeat, but there was nothing. That is when Mr. Harris came in." Mason nodded and then did something that surprised everyone. He walked into the store, stepping carefully, his eyes scanning the floor and the counters. Willa watched as he bent down near where Margaret's body still lay, studying something. He touched the floor, rubbed his fingers together, then stood and examined the counter near the cash box. When he emerged a few minutes later, his expression was grim. "Cash box has been rifled through. Bills are scattered, some likely missing. There are boot prints in the blood on the floor, bigger than Miss Vaughn's small feet would make. And unless Miss Vaughn has taken to chewing tobacco and spitting it on the floor, there is evidence of someone else being in that store." The crowd's mood was shifting now, the certainty draining away. Willa felt tears of relief prick her eyes. "But the blood on her hands," Mrs. Patterson said, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Exactly where she said it would be if she checked for a pulse," Mason countered. "No blood on her dress except where she wiped her hands. No blood on her shoes. No money in her pockets. You were about to hang an innocent woman for being compassionate." Sheriff Clayton Thompson finally pushed through the crowd, out of breath and red-faced. He was a stout man in his 50s, more politician than lawman, and he looked thoroughly overwhelmed by the situation. "What is going on here? Someone said there had been a murder." "Margaret Harris," Mason said before anyone else could speak. "Dead inside, looks like robbery. This woman found her and was nearly lynched for her trouble." Thompson looked at Willa, at her bloody hands, and his hand moved toward his gun. Mason stepped between them, his body language making it clear he would not allow anyone to touch her. "She is innocent," Mason said flatly. "And if you had been doing your job instead of taking your afternoon nap at the saloon, maybe you would have been here to figure that out before the town turned into a mob." Thompson's face went from red to purple. "Now see here, Morgan, you cannot just what? Point out that you are useless." Mason's voice was cutting. "There is a real killer out there, probably long gone by now, and you all wasted time harassing an innocent woman." The sheriff seemed to deflate under Mason's withering stare. He looked at Harris. "Tom, I am sorry about Margaret. Let me get the undertaker over here and we will figure out what happened." "We know what happened," Mason said. "Someone came in, killed Mrs. Harris, robbed the cash box, and left. Billy Henderson saw him leaving. You need to get a posse together and track him down, not stand here jawing." But even as Mason said it, Willa could see it was too late. Whoever had killed Margaret Harris had had plenty of time to disappear into the vast Texas landscape. The afternoon was waning, and tracking in the fading light would be nearly impossible. The crowd began to disperse, people drifting away now that the excitement was over, though Willa could feel their eyes on her, could hear the whispers starting. Even if they no longer thought her a killer, she was still an outsider, still suspect. Only Mason remained standing between her and the sheriff, his massive frame somehow comforting despite his intimidating presence. "Miss Vaughn needs to wash up," Mason said to Thompson. "Unless you plan to arrest her, let her go." "I will need to ask her some questions," Thompson blustered, trying to regain some authority. "Later. She has had enough for today." Mason's tone brooked no argument. He turned to Willa and his voice gentled. "Come on. There is a pump behind the boarding house. Let us get you cleaned up." Willa followed him on shaking legs, only now realizing how close she had come to disaster. As they walked through the dusty streets, she was acutely aware of the looks they were getting, of Mason's imposing presence beside her. He moved with a fluid grace unusual for a man his size, and she found herself wondering who he was, where he had come from, and why he had chosen to help her. Behind the boarding house, Mason worked the pump while Willa held her trembling hands under the cold water. The blood washed away slowly, staining the dust red at her feet. She scrubbed until her skin was raw, unable to shake the memory of Margaret's cold flesh, the stillness of death. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you had not spoken up, they would have." "They would have committed murder themselves," Mason finished. He handed her a handkerchief from his pocket, surprisingly clean. "Mob justice is not justice at all. It is just fear and anger looking for an outlet." Willa dried her hands, noticing how much they were still shaking. "I do not understand why you helped me. You do not know me. Did not need to know you to see you were innocent." Mason's blue eyes met hers, and she saw something in them, a kind of lonely understanding. "I know what it is like to be judged by people who do not know a damned thing about you." There was a story there, Willa could tell, but before she could ask, Mrs. Patterson appeared on the back porch, her expression cold. "Miss Vaughn, I am going to have to ask you to find other lodgings," the older woman said stiffly. "I cannot have a person of your reputation staying at my establishment." "My reputation?" Willa's voice rose with indignation. "I was proven innocent. Proven is a strong word. There are still questions, and I have other guests to think about. I will give you until tomorrow morning to collect your things and leave." Before Willa could respond, Mason stepped forward. "That is interesting, Mrs. Patterson, seeing as how your establishment has been empty for the past 2 weeks except for Miss Vaughn. Guess those other guests are mighty quiet." Mrs. Patterson's face pinched. "That is none of your concern, Mason Morgan. What I do with my property is my business. And throwing an innocent woman into the street is everyone's concern," Mason countered. "But you go ahead. I am sure the whole town will be real impressed with your Christian charity." Mrs. Patterson looked like she wanted to argue further, but instead huffed and disappeared back inside, slamming the door behind her. Willa felt a wave of despair wash over her. She had nowhere to go, no money for another place even if there had been one. "Do not worry about her," Mason said. "You can stay at my cabin." Willa's eyes widened. "I cannot do that. I do not know you, and that would not be proper." A hint of something that might have been amusement flickered across Mason's stern features. "My cabin is 3 miles outside of town. There is a small bunkhouse that the previous owner built for ranch hands. It is empty but sound. You can stay there until this mess gets sorted out." "I have no money to pay you." Willa hated admitting it, but the truth was unavoidable. Did not ask for money. Mason's voice was matter of fact. "You need a place to stay, I have one. Simple as that." It was not simple, though, and Willa knew it. A single woman staying on a single man's property, even in a separate building, would give the gossips more ammunition. But what choice did she have? She could not afford the hotel, and Mrs. Patterson was not going to let her stay at the boarding house. "Why are you helping me?" Willa asked again, searching his face for answers. Mason was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. "Because someone helped me once when I needed it. Because the world is hard enough without good people standing by and doing nothing. Because it is the right thing to do." There was a weight to his words, a history she could sense but not see. Finally, Willa nodded. "Thank you. I will accept your offer at least until I can find something else." "Good. Gather your things. We will head out before dark." As Willa went inside to pack her few belongings, she could hear Mrs. Patterson muttering in the kitchen about propriety and scandal. She ignored the woman, focusing on folding her 2 spare dresses, her undergarments, the few personal items she had left from her old life. Everything fit into a single small trunk and a carpet bag. When she came back outside, Mason was waiting with a sturdy-looking horse and a pack mule. He loaded her trunk onto the mule with ease, lifting it as if it weighed nothing. Willa found herself staring at the play of muscles under his shirt before catching herself and looking away, her face heating. "You ride?" Mason asked. "Not well, but I can manage." "You can ride with me then. Easier than trying to manage a horse when you are exhausted." He swung up into the saddle and then extended his hand down to her. Willa hesitated only a moment before taking it. His hand engulfed hers, calloused and strong, and he lifted her up behind him effortlessly. She had to wrap her arms around his waist to stay secure, and she was immediately aware of the solid warmth of him, the strength in his frame. "Hold on," he said, and then they were moving, leaving Fort Stockton behind in a cloud of dust. The ride to Mason's cabin took them northwest, into rougher country where the land rose and fell in rocky hills, covered with scrub brush and scattered juniper. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and despite everything that had happened, Willa found herself appreciating the harsh beauty of the landscape. Mason did not try to make conversation, and Willa was grateful. She needed time to process, to let the shock and fear drain away. She became aware of his breathing, steady and calm, of the way he sat the horse with complete confidence. This was a man at home in the wilderness, she realized, more comfortable out here than in the town they had left behind. The cabin appeared as they crested a hill, a solid structure of logs with a stone chimney, surrounded by a small corral and a few outbuildings. True to his word, there was a smaller building set apart from the main cabin, obviously the bunkhouse he had mentioned. Mason helped her down, his hands on her waist strong and steady, and Willa was surprised to feel disappointed when he let go. She scolded herself silently. She barely knew this man, and she was in no position to be having such thoughts. "Let me show you the bunkhouse," Mason said, taking her trunk from the mule. The bunkhouse was simple but clean, with a wood stove in one corner, a bed along one wall, a table and chair, and a few shelves. A window looked out toward the main cabin. It was more than Willa had hoped for. "There is firewood stacked outside," Mason said, setting her trunk down. "Well is between here and the main cabin. I will bring you some food shortly." "Mason," Willa said, stopping him before he could leave. "Why do they call you a mountain man? We are not in the mountains." He paused in the doorway, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the fading light. "Because before I came here, I spent 7 years in the Rockies, trapping and hunting. Came down to Texas about 2 years ago, bought this place with what I saved." Town people do not know what else to call a man who prefers the wilderness to civilization. "Why did you come down from the mountains?" Mason's expression closed off, becoming unreadable. "That is a story for another time. Get settled. I will be back soon." He left before she could ask anything else, and Willa sat down on the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by everything. Just this morning she had woken up worried about how to stretch her dwindling funds. Now she had been accused of murder, defended by a stranger, and found herself staying on the property of a man she knew almost nothing about. True to his word, Mason returned within the hour with a plate of food, simple but plentiful. Beans, bacon, cornbread, and coffee. Willa realized she had not eaten since breakfast and accepted it gratefully. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. I do not know what I would have done if you had not been there today." Mason shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Just did what was right. Most people do not, though. Most people just go along with the crowd. I am not most people." There was no arrogance in the statement, just fact. "No," Willa agreed, studying him. "You certainly are not." He shifted, clearly uneasy with the scrutiny. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we will figure out what comes next." After he left, Willa ate her meal and then lay down on the bed, exhausted but unable to sleep. Her mind kept replaying the day's events, Margaret's lifeless body, the crowd's angry faces, Mason's unexpected intervention. Who was he really? And why did she feel so safe here, miles from town with a man who was essentially a stranger? Eventually, exhaustion won out and she slept, dreamlessly and deeply. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of an axe hitting wood. Rising and making herself presentable, she looked out to see Mason splitting logs behind the main cabin, his shirt already discarded in the morning warmth. Willa knew she should look away, but she found herself transfixed by the display of raw strength, the way his muscles flexed with each powerful swing, the sheen of sweat on his tanned skin. When he noticed her watching, she quickly moved away from the window, her face burning. She busied herself making the bed, trying to compose herself. She was a practical woman, not given to flights of fancy, but there was something about Mason Morgan that affected her in a way she did not fully understand. A knock on the door made her jump. She opened it to find Mason, now with his shirt back on, holding a bucket of fresh water. "Morning," he said. "Thought you might want to wash up. There is a screen in the corner there for privacy." "Thank you." Willa took the bucket, acutely aware of his nearness. This close, she could smell the scent of him, pine and smoke and clean sweat. "Mason, I have been thinking. I need to find work. I cannot just stay here indefinitely without contributing." "You can stay as long as you need to," he said firmly. That is generous, but it is not right. I need to earn my keep somehow. Mason considered this. You said you came to the mercantile for thread. You sew? Yes, I am good with a needle. I used to take in mending and alterations in San Antonio. Could you make shirts? I can never find ones that fit properly, and I go through them quick out here. Willa smiled despite herself. She could imagine the shirts in the general store would not accommodate his frame. I could do that. If you have fabric and thread, I could make you several shirts. It would not be much, but it would be something. There is a trunk in the cabin that belonged to the previous owner's wife. She died of fever before they could move in proper. He left it all behind when he sold me the place. There is fabric and sewing supplies in there. You can use whatever you need. It was a practical solution that would allow Willa to feel less like a charity case. I would like that. Thank you, Mason nodded. I have to ride out to check some of the fence line today. Will you be all right here on your own? I will be fine. I am used to taking care of myself. There is a rifle hanging just inside the cabin door if you need it. You know how to shoot. My father taught me when I was young. Good. I will be back before dark. He hesitated as if wanting to say something more, then simply nodded and left. Willa spent the day exploring her new temporary home. The bunkhouse was clean and well maintained. The wood stove worked properly, and the bed was comfortable. She found the trunk Mason had mentioned in his cabin after calling out to make sure he had indeed left. The cabin itself was Spartan but functional. A large bed in one corner, a table and chairs, shelves with supplies, a much larger stove for both heating and cooking. Everything was neat and orderly, no clutter or personal items visible. It was the space of a man who did not let himself get attached to things, who could pack up and leave at a moment's notice. The trunk yielded treasures. Bolts of fabric in various colors and weights, spools of thread, needles, scissors, even a pincushion. Willa carried everything back to the bunkhouse and set up a workspace at the small table. She had measurements to figure out for Mason's considerable proportions, but she could start on the pattern. She spent the afternoon contentedly working, losing herself in the familiar rhythm of measuring and cutting. When her eyes grew tired from the close work, she stepped outside and simply enjoyed the peace of the place. It was so different from Fort Stockton, from San Antonio before that. Out here, there was only the wind, the cry of hawks, the rustling of brush. No crowds, no judging eyes, no whispers. Mason returned as the sun was setting, and Willa had a strange flash of what it might be like to be a wife waiting for her husband's return. She pushed the thought away as foolish. This was a temporary arrangement, nothing more. "How was your day?" she asked as he dismounted. "Fences holding. Saw some antelope but no cattle rustlers." There might have been a hint of humor in his tone. "How about you? I started on a pattern for your shirts. I will need to take measurements tomorrow if you have time." "I have time in the morning." He looked at her for a long moment. "You look more settled." "I feel more settled. Thank you for giving me something useful to do." They fell into a routine over the next few days. Mason would work his land during the day while Willa sewed. In the evenings, he would bring her dinner and they would talk, slowly getting to know each other. She learned that he had been born in Missouri, had headed west at 18 after his parents died of cholera, had spent years learning to survive in the mountains before coming to Texas. He was 28 now, just 5 years older than Willa. Why Texas? She asked one evening as they sat outside the bunkhouse watching the stars emerge. Why not stay in the mountains if you loved it there? Mason was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then, "I had a partner up there, another trapper named Sam. We worked together for 3 years, became close friends. One winter we were caught in a blizzard, got separated. I searched for days but never found him. Come spring, I found his body. He had fallen into a ravine, broken his leg, could not get out, died alone. Willa's heart ached for the pain in his voice. I am so sorry. I could not stay after that. Every mountain, every valley reminded me of him, reminded me that I had failed him. So I came south, found this place, figured I would try settling down proper-like. You did not fail him, Willa said softly. You could not have known what happened. Could not save him either. Mason's jaw was tight. Just like I could not save my parents from the cholera, seems like everyone I care about ends up dying. So you stopped caring, Willa guessed. Kept yourself apart so it would not hurt any more. Mason looked at her, surprised. You are perceptive. My mother died when I was young. My father raised me alone, and he was a hard man, not given to sentiment. But after he died last year, I found letters he had kept, letters from my mother when they were courting. He had loved her deeply, and losing her nearly destroyed him. He became distant because he was afraid of being hurt again. I understand that impulse. But, Mason said, hearing the unspoken word, but I think shutting yourself off from feeling is a kind of death too. Maybe slower, maybe less dramatic, but death all the same. They sat in silence after that, the truth of her words hanging between them. Finally, Mason stood. I should let you get some rest. Good night, Willa. Good night, Mason. But after he left, Willa lay awake thinking about what she had said, about what she had seen in Mason's eyes. He was a man running from pain, hiding in the wilderness, keeping the world at arm's length. And she was a woman with no place to belong, no family left, no clear future. Perhaps it was natural that they would find each other, two lonely souls in the vast emptiness of West Texas. A week after the incident in Fort Stockton, Sheriff Thompson rode out to the cabin. Willa saw him coming and felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. Mason emerged from the cabin, his expression guarded. Sheriff, Mason said neutrally. What brings you out here? Need to talk to Miss Vaughn, Thompson said, dismounting. Got some questions about the Harris matter. She told you everything she knows, Mason said, but he turned to Willa. Up to you if you want to talk to him. Willa stepped forward. I have nothing to hide, Sheriff. What do you need to know? Thompson pulled out a small notebook. Been doing some investigating, talking to people. Seems there was a drifter in town that day, been hanging around for a few days prior. Fellow named Jack Sullivan, got a reputation for robbery. Billy Henderson's description matches him. We think he is the one who killed Mrs. Harris. Have you caught him? Willa asked. Not yet, but we have wires out to other towns. He will turn up. Thompson looked uncomfortable. Miss Vaughn, I owe you an apology. Should have done proper investigating before letting the town turn on you like that. Was not right. No, it was not, Willa agreed, her voice steady. But I appreciate you saying so. Folks in town are talking, Thompson continued. Some feel bad about what happened, about how they treated you, Mrs. Patterson especially. She asked me to tell you that you are welcome back at the boarding house if you want. That is generous of her, Willa said, keeping her tone neutral. She had no intention of going back, not after how quickly the woman had thrown her out. Course, we are also hearing talk about you staying out here with Morgan. Thompson's eyes flicked to Mason. People are concerned about propriety. People should mind their own business, Mason said flatly. Miss Vaughn is staying in a separate building, and her reputation is none of their concern. I am just saying what I am hearing, Thompson said defensively. Might be easier on everyone if she came back to town. Easier on who? Willa surprised herself with the sharpness in her voice. On the people who were ready to lynch me. I am grateful for your apology, Sheriff, but the fact remains that not one person besides Mason stood up for me that day. Not one person questioned whether I might be innocent, so forgive me if I am not eager to return to Fort Stockton's hospitality. Thompson had the grace to look ashamed. You are right, Miss Vaughn. We failed you. I failed you. All I can say is we will do better. See that you do, Mason said. Was there anything else? No, that is all. I will let you know if we catch Sullivan. Thompson mounted his horse and then paused. Morgan, for what it is worth, you did right that day. Wish I had been there to do my job proper. After the sheriff left, Willa found herself shaking with reaction. Mason stepped close, not touching her but offering his solid presence. You all right? He asked gently. I thought I would feel better hearing him apologize, but I just feel angry. Angry that it took a week for anyone to care about the truth. Angry that they judged me so quickly. Anger is fair. They nearly killed you. I know. Willa wrapped her arms around herself. Mason, what am I going to do? Even if they caught the real killer, even if everyone apologizes, I will always be the woman who was accused of murder in Fort Stockton. How can I build a life here after that? Mason was quiet for a moment. Maybe you do not build a life in Fort Stockton. Maybe you build one out here. Willa looked up at him, trying to read his expression. What are you saying? I am saying you are welcome to stay as long as you want. I am saying this is a big property and there is plenty of work if you want it. I am saying. He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. I am saying I like having you here. Place feels less empty. Willa's heart fluttered in her chest. She had been trying not to think about the feelings that had been growing, trying not to notice how her pulse quickened when Mason was near, how she found excuses to talk to him, how she looked forward to their evening conversations. But hearing him admit that he valued her presence made it impossible to ignore anymore. I like being here, she admitted softly. I like talking to you. I like the peace of this place. I like. She trailed off, not quite brave enough to finish the thought. What? Mason's voice was low and he had stepped closer, his blue eyes intense on her face. I like you, Willa finished, barely above a whisper. More than I probably should, given the circumstances. For a long moment, Mason just looked at her, something warm and wondering in his expression. Then slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, he reached up and cupped her face with one large, calloused hand. Willa, he said, and her name in his deep voice sent shivers through her. I have not cared about anyone in a long time, told myself I would not, that it was safer that way. But then you came along and everything changed. How? She whispered. I cannot stop thinking about you, cannot stop wanting to protect you, to make you smile, to know everything about you. And it scares me because everyone I have cared about has left me, one way or another. Willa reached up and covered his hand with hers. I am not going anywhere, not unless you send me away. Never, Mason said fiercely. I would never send you away. Then he was kissing her, gentle at first and then deeper as she responded, her arms coming up around his neck. He wrapped his arms around her waist, lifting her slightly, and Willa felt like she was drowning in sensation. His mouth was hot and demanding, his body hard against hers, and she could feel the barely restrained strength in him, the way he held himself back from crushing her to him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Mason rested his forehead against hers. I do not want to rush you. I know things are complicated right now. Things are always complicated, Willa said, still dizzy from the kiss. But this feels right. This feels like the first right thing that has happened to me in a long time. To me too, Mason admitted. He pulled back slightly, still holding her but putting enough distance that they could think clearly. But I want to do this proper. I want to court you, Willa. I want to give you time to be sure. Willa smiled at his earnestness, at this large, rough man trying so hard to be honorable. I would like that, though I think we may be doing things a bit backwards, living on the same property and all. A hint of a smile touched Mason's lips. Well, we are not exactly conventional people. No, Willa agreed, laughing softly. We certainly are not. Over the following weeks, they settled into a new rhythm. Mason continued his work during the day, but now he made more time to be with Willa. They would take evening walks around the property, talking about everything and nothing. He taught her to shoot properly, his arms coming around her from behind to help her aim, his nearness making it hard to concentrate. She made him 3 new shirts that actually fit his broad shoulders, and the look on his face when he tried them on made all the painstaking work worthwhile. They were cautious with physical affection, both aware of the need for propriety and of the intensity between them that could easily overwhelm caution. But there were stolen kisses, held hands, moments of closeness that left Willa breathless and wanting more. A month after the incident, a rider came from Fort Stockton with news. Jack Sullivan had been caught trying to rob a store in Pecos. He had confessed to killing Margaret Harris when she had surprised him during the robbery. He was being held for trial. "Town wants to have a meeting," the messenger, young Billy Henderson, said awkwardly. "Want to formally apologize to Miss Vaughn. Reverend Mitchell is organizing it." Mason looked at Willa, leaving the decision to her. Willa thought about it for a long moment. Part of her wanted to refuse, to stay hidden out here where she was safe and happy. But another part knew that she could not move forward if she was constantly running from the past. "Tell them I will come," she said finally. "This Saturday, if that works." "Yes, madam." "They will be glad to hear it." Billy hesitated, then added, "Miss Vaughn, I am real sorry about what happened, about not speaking up sooner about the things people said. You did not deserve that." "Thank you, Billy. That means a lot." After Billy left, Mason pulled Willa into his arms. "You do not have to do this if you do not want to, I know. But I think I need to. I need to face them, to hear what they have to say. And then maybe I can finally put it behind me." Saturday arrived bright and clear. Willa dressed carefully in one of her good dresses, a dark blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. Mason wore one of the shirts she had made him, and Willa could not help but admire how handsome he looked, his hair pulled back, his jaw freshly shaved. They rode into Fort Stockton together, and Willa was surprised to see the number of people gathered at the church. It seemed like the entire town had turned out. Her stomach fluttered with nerves, but Mason's steady presence beside her gave her courage. Reverend Mitchell greeted them at the door, his expression solemn. "Miss Vaughn, Mr. Morgan, thank you for coming. We will try not to take too much of your time." Inside, the church was packed. Willa recognized most of the faces. Thomas Harris sat in the front row, looking older and grayer than he had a month ago. Mrs. Patterson was there, looking nervous. Sheriff Thompson stood at the side, his hat in his hands. Dozens of others filled the pews, all watching as Willa and Mason walked down the aisle. Reverend Mitchell took his place at the pulpit. "We are gathered here today to right a wrong. A month ago, in our grief and anger and fear, we turned on one of our own. We accused an innocent woman of a terrible crime without evidence, without compassion, without justice. We nearly committed murder ourselves in the name of righteousness. Miss Willa Vaughn, we owe you an apology. We owe you more than that, but an apology is where we must start." He turned to Willa. "Miss Vaughn, on behalf of this town, I apologize for the way you were treated. We failed you in the most fundamental way. We failed to see your humanity, to give you the benefit of doubt, to treat you with the dignity every person deserves. We are deeply, profoundly sorry." Thomas Harris stood next, his voice thick with emotion. "Miss Vaughn, I lost my wife that day, and in my grief I blamed you. I see now how wrong I was, how I let my pain blind me to the truth. You tried to help Margaret, and I accused you of killing her. I will regret that for the rest of my life. I am so very sorry." One by one, others stood. Sheriff Thompson apologized for not doing his job properly. Mrs. Patterson apologized for throwing Willa out. The banker, the shopkeepers, the ranchers, even young Billy Henderson again, all offered their apologies and their shame at what had happened. When they finished, the church was silent, everyone waiting for Willa's response. She stood, Mason standing with her, his hand at the small of her back in silent support. "Thank you for your apologies," Willa said, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. "It takes courage to admit when you are wrong, and I appreciate that you are willing to do so." She paused, gathering her thoughts. What happened that day was terrifying. I was accused of murder, threatened by a mob, nearly hanged for a crime I did not commit. And yes, I was angry. I am still angry, if I am honest, because it should not have taken a stranger to point out that I deserved fair treatment. It should not have taken a month for people to question their assumptions. She looked around the room, meeting eyes, letting them see her. But I also know that fear makes people do terrible things. Grief clouds judgment. And I know that holding on to anger will only poison me in the end. So I forgive you, all of you. I forgive the rush to judgment, the accusations, the threats. I forgive because that is the only way forward. There were tears on many faces now, relief and gratitude and shame all mixed together. Willa felt the weight she had been carrying begin to lift. "But forgiveness does not mean forgetting," she continued. "I will remember what happened, and I hope you will too. I hope the next time a stranger comes to town, the next time something terrible happens, you will remember this moment and choose compassion over fear. Choose justice over revenge. Choose to see the person, not just the accusation." She took a breath. "I will not be returning to live in Fort Stockton. I have found a home elsewhere, but I bear no ill will toward this town or its people. I hope that you can take this lesson and build something better from it." Reverend Mitchell nodded, his eyes wet. "Thank you, Miss Vaughn. Your grace in this matter is more than we deserve. We will strive to be better, to do better. You have my word on that." After the service, people came up to shake Willa's hand, to offer personal apologies, to thank her for her forgiveness. It was overwhelming, but also healing in a way she had not expected. She saw genuine remorse, real determination to change. Thomas Harris approached last, his hands trembling. "Miss Vaughn, I want you to have this." He held out a small velvet pouch. "Margaret's locket, she wore it always. Inside is a picture of me and her on our wedding day. I want you to have it, as a remembrance that something good can come from something terrible. You showed compassion to a dying woman. That deserves to be remembered." Willa took the locket with gentle hands. "Thank you, Mr. Harris. I will treasure it." As they left the church, walking back to where they had left the horse, several people stopped them to offer further apologies and to express their hope that Willa and Mason would still visit town occasionally. The atmosphere was completely different from that terrible day a month ago, filled now with warmth and genuine regard. On the ride home, Mason pulled Willa close. "You were magnificent in there. The way you spoke, the way you carried yourself. I was proud of you." Willa leaned against him, suddenly exhausted. "I am just glad it is over. Glad I can finally stop being angry and hurt and afraid." "What did you mean when you said you found a home elsewhere?" Mason asked carefully. "Did you mean my cabin?" Willa twisted to look at him, seeing the uncertainty in his eyes. "Yes, if you will have me, Willa." Mason stopped the horse, turning fully to face her. "I will have you any way you are willing. As a friend, as a resident of my property, as—" He paused, then seemed to gather his courage. "As my wife, if you would want that." Willa's breath caught. "Mason, are you proposing? I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a month, but Willa, I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You make me want to risk caring again, risk opening my heart again. You make me believe that maybe the future does not have to be lonely. So yes, I guess I am proposing. Badly probably, but I am proposing." "It is not bad," Willa said, tears gathering in her eyes. "It is perfect. And yes, Mason, yes, I will marry you." The kiss he gave her then was full of joy and relief and promise. When they finally pulled apart, both were laughing, the sound carrying across the empty landscape. "We should probably tell Reverend Mitchell," Willa said. "See if he will marry us. We can do it proper with the town there if you want. Let them see that you are not just forgiven but cherished." "I would like that," Willa admitted. "I would like to start our life together with no shadows, no doubts." They rode back to Fort Stockton and found Reverend Mitchell still at the church. When they told him their news, his face split into a wide smile. "I would be honored to marry you both. This is wonderful news, truly." "When were you thinking?" "Soon," Mason said, looking at Willa. "No reason to wait if we are sure." 2 weeks, Willa suggested. "That should give people time to prepare if they want to attend." 2 weeks it is, Reverend Mitchell agreed. "I will spread the word. And Miss Vaughn, may I say that I cannot think of a better man than Mason Morgan. He is rough around the edges, perhaps, but his heart is good and true." Word of the engagement spread through Fort Stockton like wildfire. Over the next 2 weeks, Willa found herself the recipient of gifts and well wishes from the townspeople. Mrs. Patterson brought fabric for a wedding dress and insisted on helping to sew it. The wives of the ranchers organized a party to celebrate. Even Sheriff Thompson offered to provide security for the ceremony, though what he thought might happen at a wedding remained unclear. Thomas Harris came to the cabin one afternoon with a wagon full of furniture. "It was Margaret's hope chest," he explained, his voice gruff. "She was saving it for a daughter we never had. She would have wanted you to have it, Miss Vaughn. Please, it would ease my heart to know it is being used by someone who deserves it." Willa accepted with tears in her eyes, understanding the magnitude of the gesture. Inside the chest were linens, dishes, a set of good silverware, embroidered pillowcases, all the things a young woman collected for her future home. It was a treasure, and it was an absolution of sorts, Thomas Harris's way of truly letting go of his anger and finding peace. The day before the wedding, Willa stood in the bunkhouse wearing the dress she and Mrs. Patterson had made. It was simple but elegant, white cotton with small blue flowers embroidered around the hem and neckline. She looked at herself in the small mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. A month ago she had been lost, accused, alone. Now she was about to marry a man she loved, accepted by a community that had wronged her, and standing on the threshold of a new life. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Patterson said softly from the doorway. "Mason Morgan is a lucky man." "I am lucky too," Willa said. "A month ago I thought my life was over. Now it feels like it is just beginning." "That is grace, my dear, grace and forgiveness and the courage to let go of the past." Mrs. Patterson helped her out of the dress, careful not to wrinkle it. "I hope you know how much your forgiveness meant to all of us. We do not deserve it, but we will spend the rest of our lives trying to earn it." "Just be better," Willa said. "That is all I ask. Be better to the next stranger who comes through town." The wedding day arrived clear and warm, perfect October weather. The church was packed again, but this time the atmosphere was joyful. Willa walked down the aisle on Sheriff Thompson's arm, the lawman having volunteered since she had no family to give her away. She saw friendly faces on all sides, saw genuine happiness for her, but her eyes were only for Mason. He stood at the front of the church looking nervous and handsome in a new suit that must have been specially made to fit his frame. His hair was neatly tied back, his face freshly shaved, but his eyes were what caught her. They were full of love and wonder and a vulnerability he showed to no one else. The ceremony was simple. They spoke the traditional vows, exchanged plain gold bands that Mason had bought from the jeweler in town. When Reverend Mitchell pronounced them husband and wife and Mason kissed her, the church erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration afterward was held in the town square, with tables of food and a small band playing. People came up to congratulate them, to wish them well, to express again their happiness that good had come from such a terrible beginning. Willa danced with Mason, his big hands gentle on her waist, his smile transforming his normally stern face into something beautiful. "Happy?" he asked as they swayed to the music. "Happier than I have ever been," Willa answered honestly. "I did not think I would ever find this. Home, love, family." "We will have a good life," Mason promised. "I will spend every day making sure you know you are loved and cherished." "I already know," Willa said, reaching up to touch his face. "You have shown me every day since we met." As the sun began to set, they said their goodbyes and headed back to the cabin, to their home. Mason had moved Willa's things into the main cabin, and they spent their wedding night wrapped in each other's arms, whispering words of love and promises for the future. The years that followed were full and rich. Willa discovered she had a talent for raising chickens and goats, and her eggs and cheese became sought after in Fort Stockton. Mason expanded his land holdings, building up a small but successful ranch. They worked side by side during the days and held each other close at night, their love deepening with each passing season. 2 years after their wedding, Willa gave birth to a son they named Matthew Morgan. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determination, a strong, healthy baby who filled their home with laughter. 3 years later came a daughter, Sarah, delicate and sweet-tempered. Willa became a respected member of the Fort Stockton community, known for her fairness and her willingness to help anyone in need. When new people came to town, she made a point of welcoming them, remembering what it felt like to be a stranger in a place where no one knew your name. The story of her accusation and forgiveness became part of town lore, a reminder to always seek truth before judgment. Thomas Harris became a regular visitor to the Morgan Ranch, finding solace in watching Willa's children grow, seeing life continue despite loss. He taught Matthew to whittle, and told Sarah stories of his late wife Margaret, keeping her memory alive while building new connections. Mason never lost his love of the wilderness, but he learned that solitude and loneliness were not the same thing. He taught his son to track and hunt, taught his daughter to ride and shoot, shared with them the skills that had kept him alive in the mountains. But he also taught them tenderness, showing them through his love for Willa that strength and gentleness were not opposites but complements. On their 10th anniversary, they sat on the porch of their home watching the sun set over the Texas hills. The children were asleep inside, and they had a rare moment of quiet. "You ever think about that day?" Mason asked. "The day we met?" "Sometimes," Willa admitted. "I think about how scared I was, how alone I felt. And then I think about you stepping between me and that mob, and I am grateful all over again." "I am grateful too. Grateful that I was there, grateful that you gave me a chance, grateful for every day we have had since." "Do you ever regret leaving the mountains?" Willa asked. It was a question she had never quite dared to ask before. Mason considered it seriously. "I thought the mountains were the only place I could be myself, the only place big enough for all my grief and anger. But you showed me that was not true. You showed me that home is not a place, it is a person. And you are my home, Willa, you and our children. I would not trade this life for anything." Willa leaned against his shoulder, content. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, bright and clear in the big Texas sky. Their story became the story that mothers told their daughters, that fathers told their sons. It became a reminder that the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes, that forgiveness is stronger than vengeance, that love can grow even in the harshest soil. It became a part of Fort Stockton's identity, shaping the town's character for generations to come. The lesson they taught was simple but profound. Do not judge too quickly. Do not let fear override compassion. Do not close your heart because opening it is risky. Life is uncertain and sometimes cruel, but it is also full of unexpected grace, of second chances, of the possibility that the person you least expect might become the one you cannot live without. Mason and Willa Morgan lived long lives, surrounded by children and eventually grandchildren. They faced hardships as all people do, droughts and illness and the simple struggles of daily life on the frontier. But they faced them together, their love the foundation that held steady when everything else shook. When they were old and gray, they would still take evening walks around their property, hand in hand, comfortable in the silence that comes from knowing someone so well that words are often unnecessary. They would sit on their porch and watch the sun set, remembering that first terrible day and marveling at how something so beautiful had grown from such dark beginnings. And when they told their grandchildren about how they met, they always emphasized the same points. That mercy is more powerful than judgment. That love can find you in the most unexpected places. That the courage to forgive, to trust, to open your heart again after it has been broken, is the greatest courage of all. The town of Fort Stockton never forgot the lesson Willa taught them. They never forgot that they had nearly killed an innocent woman in their fear and grief, and they never forgot the grace with which she had forgiven them. It changed them fundamentally, making them slower to judge, quicker to extend compassion, more willing to look beyond surface appearances to see the person underneath. Years later, when travelers came through and heard the story, they were always surprised that it had ended so well. That the woman who had been accused had not just been vindicated, but had found love and built a life in the very place that had wronged her. That the town had not just apologized, but had truly changed, becoming better because of their shame. But those who knew Mason and Willa were not surprised at all. They had seen the steel beneath Willa's gentle exterior, the deep well of kindness beneath Mason's rough surface. They had watched these two wounded souls find each other and heal together, creating something beautiful and lasting. On a warm spring day many years after that terrible accusation, Willa stood in the garden behind her home, her hands in the soil, planting vegetables for the coming season. Her hair was silver now, her face lined with the marks of a life well lived. Mason came up behind her, still tall and strong though age had gentled some of his rough edges, and wrapped his arms around her waist. "I love you," he said, simple and direct as always. "I love you too," Willa responded, leaning back against him. "Always have, always will." They stood together in the sunshine, surrounded by the land they had built into a home, the family they had created, the community they had helped to heal. It was not the life either of them had imagined when they were young. It was better. Because sometimes the worst day of your life leads directly to the best thing that ever happened to you. Sometimes the moment when you lose everything is the moment when you find what really matters. Sometimes mercy triumphs over judgment, love conquers fear, and grace transforms tragedy into hope. And sometimes, when a mountain man defends a woman against false accusations, when a whole town apologizes and she forgives them all, the ending is not just happy but transcendent, proof that people can change, that communities can heal, and that love is always, always worth the risk. Their story ended not with drama or grand gestures, but with simple daily joy, with ordinary moments made extraordinary by the depth of feeling behind them. With morning coffee shared in companionable silence, with hands held across the dinner table, with quiet conversations on the porch as day faded into night, with the knowledge that they had found in each other exactly what they needed, exactly when they needed it. Mason and Willa Morgan lived the rest of their days in peace and contentment, their love a beacon that illuminated not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them. And when they finally passed, within months of each other as longtime married couples so often do, they left behind a legacy of forgiveness, redemption, and the transformative power of love. The town of Fort Stockton placed a marker in the church garden, simple and understated like they had been, that read, "Mason and Willa Morgan. They taught us that grace is stronger than judgment, and love is the greatest force of all." And every year on the anniversary of their wedding, the town would gather to remember, to tell the story again, to remind themselves of the lesson that should never be forgotten, that everyone deserves a chance, that compassion should always come before condemnation, that the measure of a community is not whether it makes mistakes, but whether it has the courage to admit them and the grace to do better. The Morgan Ranch continued through their children and grandchildren, each generation adding their own stories to the family history, but always remembering the foundation that Mason and Willa had laid. The land they had worked together, the values they had lived by, the love they had shared, all of it became part of the fabric of who the Morgan family was and would always be. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right across the Texas hills, people swore they could feel the presence of those two souls, still together, still watching over the land and the people they had loved. It was a fanciful notion, perhaps, but it brought comfort, a reminder that some bonds are too strong to be broken even by death. The story of Mountain Man and the woman he defended became a legend, passed down through generations, adapted and embellished over time, but always keeping its essential truth. That love can bloom in the darkest soil. That forgiveness can heal the deepest wounds. That sometimes the person who saves you is the person you end up saving in return. And so their story concluded, not with an ending but with a beginning that never stopped, a love that never faded, a legacy that never died. It was everything a story should be. Dramatic and romantic, heartbreaking and hopeful, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of two people who choose each other against all odds. In the end, that was what mattered most. Not the accusation or the trial or even the forgiveness, important as those were. What mattered was that Mason and Willa found each other, built a life together, and showed everyone around them what true partnership looked like. They proved that the wildest frontier was not the untamed land of West Texas but the human heart, and that conquering that frontier required not strength or cunning but vulnerability, trust, and the courage to love without reservation. Their happily ever after was hard-won and all the more precious for it. They had earned their peace, their joy, their contentment through trials and tribulations that would have broken lesser people. But they had not been broken. They had been forged, tempered, made stronger and better by everything they had endured. And that was how their story truly ended, with two people who had found in each other a home, a purpose, a reason to believe that no matter how dark the night, dawn always came. With a family that thrived for generations, with a community that was forever changed for the better, with a love that became the stuff of legend, inspiring others to be braver, kinder, more willing to take chances on hope. Mason and Willa Morgan lived, loved, and left behind a world better than they found it. And really, what more could anyone ask from a life well lived?